Sarah Matthews' wedding day was supposed to be a perfect day, filled with joy and happiness. She had been preparing for this event for the past 18 months. Everything was ready. The ivory wedding dress that hugged her body, her elegant chestnut-colored curls, and the perfect little details she had planned for so long. All that was left was the wedding with Michael Anderson, the man she loved and was about to begin her married life with. However, something unexpected happened that changed everything in this important moment. Sarah's dog, Max, a loyal German shepherd, blocked her way as she was about to step out the door to begin the ceremony. Max was not an ordinary dog. He had been by Sarah's side since she was a young girl, helping her through the tough times in life. They had spent many long years together, from high school to Sarah's adulthood as she began to build her career. Max had always been an important part of her life. Sarah stood before the mirror, looking at herself in the beautiful wedding dress, feeling an unease she couldn't explain. Despite everything about her being perfect, she couldn't deny the invisible anxiety creeping into her mind. When she looked into Max's eyes, she felt that something was wrong. Her dog, her loyal companion who had been with her through thick and thin, was looking at her with eyes that no longer had the energy they once had. Max's gaze, which had always been filled with protection and love, now carried a hint of sadness and concern. Sarah suddenly realized that Max was not as lively as before. He didn't chase the birds in the yard or play around her like he usually did every day. "Max, are you okay?" Sarah softly called, sitting next to her dog and gently stroking his head. Max looked at her with his deep eyes, but there was no longer the bright spark they once had. Sarah's heart tightened, and she felt a painful sensation in her chest. She had raised Max from when he was a weak little puppy, and now he had grown up, becoming an indispensable part of her life. But now she sensed the change in his body. Max was no longer as healthy as before, and that made Sarah feel worried. Sarah had decided to take Max to the vet before the wedding took place. However, with all the wedding preparations and her excitement, she had overlooked these signs. After all, her wedding day was very important. Sarah couldn't even imagine a wedding without Max by her side. This loyal dog had always been part of her most important moments. She had insisted that Max be part of the wedding, despite her mother's objections. Both her family and Michael understood how special Max was to Sarah, so they agreed. However, as the wedding day approached, Sarah's anxiety grew. The uneasy feeling wouldn't leave her. Although she tried to shake off these thoughts, her worry about Max was ever present. Her heart could not stop thinking about her dog. She felt that he was having health problems, but she couldn't pinpoint the exact reason. She decided to take Max to the vet right after the wedding, if possible. She knew that this was more important than any wedding. When Sarah and Max got into the car to head to the church, her worry grew even more. Max clung to her unusually throughout the trip. He didn't sit still as usual, but instead rested his head on her lap, his eyes intensely, unusually watching her. Sarah sensed something was off. She couldn't understand why Max was behaving this way, but she knew something was wrong. The moments in the car felt like they were stretching on forever. Sarah felt even more anxious and uneasy. As Sarah arrived at the church, her anxiety grew. The photographer was ready to take the first pictures of the bride. Sarah stood next to an ancient oak tree in the churchyard, the warm September sunlight streaming through the changing leaves, creating a magical atmosphere. Everything seemed perfect, but Sarah couldn't focus on the photos. She was only thinking about Max. Suddenly, as everyone was preparing, Max stood up and walked towards Sarah, blocking her view. The dog didn't growl, and there was no sign of aggression, but his actions made everyone feel uneasy. Sarah gently called Max to come back and tried to pull him away, but Max didn't move. He just stood there, looking at her with eyes full of concern. Sarah bent down, kneeling next to her dog, and that was when she realized that something was seriously wrong. At that moment, Sarah felt like her heart was shattering. She realized that Max was no longer the healthy, happy dog he once was. His breath was labored, and his body trembled. Fear surged in Sarah's chest, and she knew she had to act immediately. She decided to call the vet. The vet arrived promptly and diagnosed Max with heart disease. He gently explained that Max was in the early stages of heart failure, and the condition could worsen quickly, especially in older dogs. Sarah felt as though all the air in the room was sucked out. Her heart broke as she realized that Max might not have much time left. Although her wedding was not going as planned, Sarah couldn't leave Max alone in his time of need. Michael, her fiancé, didn't get angry with her. He understood that Sarah's love for Max was unchangeable. They decided to hold the wedding right at the veterinary clinic, where Max could witness this important moment. Sarah's dog had been by her side throughout her life, and now he would see her step into her new life, with love and loyalty that knew no bounds. Sarah and Michael's wedding was not perfect in the usual sense, but for them, it was a complete and meaningful wedding. The story of Max's love and loyalty would forever be an inseparable part of their lives. Sarah's wedding day had been one of the days she had been waiting for a long time. Everything had been carefully planned, from the gorgeous wedding dress to her elegant curls to the smallest details of the ceremony. But at that moment, standing in front of the mirror in her wedding dress, she didn't feel the excitement she was supposed to have. Instead, in her heart was a feeling of anxiety, a sense of unease she couldn't explain. "Are you okay, Max?" Sarah whispered, her eyes full of worry and tears. She looked down at her beloved dog, Max, the German shepherd she had raised since she was a young girl. Max was not just a dog to Sarah, but a loyal companion who had been with her through every stage of her life. He had witnessed all the ups and downs, always there to protect and accompany her insignificant moments. But today, he was not the same. Max was no longer running around joyfully. His eyes lacked the bright energy they once had, now filled with fatigue and visible worry. Sarah remembered the days when she first adopted Max from the rescue shelter. At that time, he was just a skinny, fragile puppy. Now Max has grown up to become an irreplaceable part of her life. He was not only a companion but also a protector, a steady support during difficult times. But now she could clearly feel the change in him. He wasn't as lively or as happy as before. An uncontrollable worry rose within Sarah. She couldn't ignore the fact that Max was having health issues. The growing sense of unease made it impossible for her to focus on important tasks, like preparing for her wedding. She tried to remain calm, but Max's gaze kept following her as if he were silently asking for help. Sarah reached out to pet his head, but inside she felt restless and anxious. "Mom, I'll take Max to the vet after the ceremony, don't worry," Sarah told herself. But those words couldn't shake off her anxiety. She realized that despite her wedding being the most important day of her life, Max was the companion she couldn't do without. His health issues made everything more complicated. She couldn't imagine her wedding day without Max, the dog who had been by her side through the hardest times. Her mother walked into the room with a bright smile. "The makeup artist is here. Are you ready?" her mother asked, but Sarah's gaze didn't leave Max. The feeling of anxiety surged in her, and she couldn't focus on preparing for the wedding anymore. She had made up her mind. No matter what, Max had to be part of the ceremony. Even though her mother objected, Sarah couldn't leave her beloved dog behind on such an important day. Everything in the house was busy with last-minute preparations for the wedding. Bridesmaids were adjusting their dresses, and makeup and hair professionals were rushing with their tasks. In that atmosphere, everyone was cheerful and excited about the big event. However, Sarah couldn't fully focus on the ceremony. Her thoughts were consumed by Max, her dog, who she knew was facing health problems. The heavy feeling in her heart wouldn't go away. Sarah wanted to take Max to the vet before the wedding, but with all the tasks and the rushing, she could only hope that everything would be fine. She knew that if things couldn't change right now, she would take Max to the vet right after the ceremony. But would it be too late? Would Max be able to endure through the wedding? These were the questions that kept running through her mind. The trip to the church only made Sarah more anxious. Max was not like usual. He clung to Sarah strangely throughout the journey, sitting next to her without leaving her side. Max's eyes never left her. as though he wanted to say something but couldn't. Sarah sensed the difference, the weakness in his gaze. Each time Max leaned into her, Sarah felt a deep sense of worry in her heart. When they arrived at the church, the atmosphere around them was truly beautiful. The late autumn sunlight filtered through the trees, creating a romantic and warm scene. But Sarah couldn't feel the joy she was supposed to experience on her wedding day. She could only think about Max, her companion, through the years. She silently prayed that everything would be okay and that Max would get through this challenge. When the photographer prepared to take the first pictures, Max suddenly stood up and walked toward Sarah. He didn't growl, didn't show any sign of anger, but blocked her view, standing in front of her as if he wanted to protect her from something. Sarah was surprised, unsure of what to do. She gently called Max to come back and tried to pull him away from where he stood, but he didn't budge. Sarah knelt next to Max and looked into his eyes. That was when she realized something she hadn't noticed before. Max was no longer healthy. A painful feeling welled up in Sarah's heart. She knew she had to do something immediately, but in the middle of this important wedding, she couldn't let Max suffer any longer. She realized that, in any circumstance, love and care for loyal companions like Max were always the most important thing. Sarah and Michael had planned their wedding day for an entire year. It was a significant day they had been waiting for, where their love would be sworn in front of family and friends. Everything had been meticulously prepared, from the wedding attire to the smallest details. But as the big day approached, something unforeseen changed everything. Her anxiety about Max, the dog Sarah had raised since she was young. Sarah stood in the dressing room, preparing everything, but the feeling of anxiety wouldn't leave her. Max, the beloved German shepherd who had been by her side all these years, had become an essential part of Sarah's life. Even though today was her wedding day, her mind was consumed with thoughts of Max. She felt that something was wrong, and that feeling had followed her all the way from her house to the church. During the ride, Max wasn't acting like usual. He didn't sit still in the car as he usually did, but instead clung to Sarah, looking at her strangely. She felt the difference but couldn't explain it clearly. Max had always been a loyal friend, always happy and full of energy, but today he was different. He didn't chase after the birds, he didn't wag his tail when Sarah called his name. This made Sarah even more anxious. When they arrived at the church, everything seemed ready. The photographer was prepared to take the first pictures of the bride. Sunlight streamed through the windows, creating a warm and romantic atmosphere. But Sarah couldn't enjoy the moment. Her eyes never left Max, who stood quietly beside her, as though waiting for something. When the photographer asked Sarah to pose for the pictures, Max suddenly stood up. He didn't show the usual joy, but walked toward Sarah, standing in front of her, blocking the photographer's view. No growling, no anger, just an eerie silence. Max stood there, looking directly at her with eyes full of sadness and worry. "Max, are you okay?" Sarah whispered, kneeling beside her dog. Her eyes were filled with tears, and that was when she realized something she hadn't noticed before. Max's legs were trembling, his breath labored and weak. His whole body seemed to be struggling with pain he couldn't express. Sarah felt it, and her heart broke. Without waiting any longer, Sarah quickly called the vet. Everything was happening so fast, and the most important event of her life, her wedding with Michael, now seemed insignificant. Max, her loyal companion, needed her more than ever. She couldn't leave him alone in this condition. A few minutes later, the vet arrived at the church. After examining Max, the vet gently informed Sarah that her dog had early-stage heart disease. She heard the diagnosis but couldn't accept it. It felt like her heart was pierced. Max, who had always been with her through every hardship, was now facing a dangerous illness, and Sarah felt she couldn't just stand by and watch him suffer. "We need to get Max treated immediately," the vet said, and Sarah nodded, her eyes not leaving Max. She knew that the wedding was no longer the priority. She had to take Max to be treated to make sure he got the care he needed right away. However, while Sarah's heart broke, Michael, her fiancé, didn't show any anger. He understood Sarah's love for Max, and he also knew how special Max was in Sarah's life. Michael didn't insist that Sarah continue with the wedding as planned. He listened and understood Sarah's feelings, and he was ready to change everything so she could be with Max in these crucial moments. "We can hold the wedding right at the vet's office," Michael suggested. He took Sarah's hand, offering a solution full of love and understanding. Together, they decided to have the wedding right at the vet's office, where Max could be present and witness this important moment. With Sarah and Michael's agreement, the wedding ceremony took place at the vet's office. Though it wasn't the wedding they had originally planned, the love and empathy between the two of them made everything more special than ever. Sarah wore her wedding dress, holding Michael's hand, with Max by their side, witnessing the sacred moment when they exchanged their vows. The wedding didn't need to follow perfect templates. It was the sincere love and understanding that made it perfect. When the ceremony ended, Sarah didn't feel sadness. Instead, she felt grateful for being able to share this moment with Max, the friend who had always been by her side. She knew that their love for Max would never fade, and Max had shown them that unconditional love was the greatest thing. Although the ceremony didn't turn out as she had imagined, Sarah understood that the most important thing in life is love and sharing. This was the lesson Max had taught them, and it was something they would carry with them for the rest of their lives. Both Sarah and Michael had eagerly waited for their wedding day for a long time. It was the most important moment in their lives, a day to bond their love and commitment before family and friends. Everything had been meticulously planned, from the wedding dress to the music, down to the smallest details. However, on this special day, everything didn't go as they had imagined. An unforeseen event changed everything and turned the wedding into an unforgettable memory. Before stepping into the ceremony, Sarah felt a strange sensation in her heart. Not from wedding nerves, but because of her dog, Max. Max was a German Shepherd Sarah had raised since she was a young girl, and he had been her loyal companion through all the stages of her life. Max wasn't just a dog to Sarah. He was her best friend, the emotional support she turned to during tough times. However, that day, Max seemed different. He wasn't showing joy, he wasn't as active as usual, and he seemed tired. Sarah looked at Max and saw worry in his eyes, something she hadn't seen before. She decided she would take Max to the vet after the wedding, but as the big event drew closer, her anxiety grew. The wedding was supposed to be the perfect day, but Sarah couldn't stop thinking about her beloved dog. When they arrived at the church, everything seemed ready. The morning sunlight streamed through the windows, creating a warm and romantic atmosphere. Friends and family gathered, ready to congratulate Sarah and Michael. However, Sarah couldn't feel the joy she was supposed to experience on her wedding day. She could only think about Max. When the ceremony began, the photographer asked to take some photos. Suddenly, Max stood up and walked toward Sarah, blocking her view. He didn't growl, he didn't show any aggression, but his actions made everyone feel uneasy. Sarah gently called Max back, trying to pull him away, but he didn't budge. He just stood there, looking at her with eyes full of concern. Sarah knelt next to Max and softly asked, "Max, are you okay?" That was when she noticed Max's legs trembling, and his breath became labored. The painful feeling overwhelmed Sarah's heart. She immediately decided to call the vet. Everything happened too quickly and didn't go as planned. The wedding was no longer her main concern, as Max's health issues had taken over her thoughts. The vet diagnosed Max with early-stage heart disease. Hearing the diagnosis, Sarah felt her heart break. Max, who had always been her companion through so many difficulties, was now facing a dangerous illness, and Sarah couldn't just stand by and watch him suffer. However, what reassured Sarah was Michael's understanding and love for her. He didn't get upset with her for postponing the wedding to care for Max. Michael understood Sarah's love for Max, and without hesitation, he suggested holding the wedding at the veterinary clinic, where Max could witness this important moment. This decision was a big change, but it made Sarah and Michael's wedding even more special than ever. They held their wedding in the warm space of the vet's office, with only close family, friends, and Max, the dog who had been with Sarah through all the ups and downs of her life. Although it wasn't the perfect wedding they had originally planned, this ceremony carried deep meaning and completeness. Max was there with Sarah during the most important moment of her life, and that was what made the wedding perfect. 1 year after the wedding, Sarah and Michael opened their hearts to adopt a new dog from the rescue shelter. The dog, named Duke, was older in need of a home and love. They decided to adopt Duke because they knew that love wasn't measured by the amount of time but by the quality of affection. Duke brought warmth and joy to their lives and reminded them of the lesson Max had taught them: unconditional love. Sarah and Michael's story is not one about a perfect wedding in the conventional sense. It is a story of genuine love, loyalty, and sacrifice, values that truly matter in life. They learned that love doesn't always follow a perfect plan, but it is the moments filled with emotion and understanding that are most valuable. Love doesn't always go according to the plans we set. Sometimes, change and sacrifice are what make love beautiful. Max taught Sarah and Michael that unconditional love is a precious value that we must cherish and give. Sometimes, moments that seem imperfect are actually the most valuable memories of our lives. Thank you for listening to this story. I hope you have felt the power of love and loyalty, and also remember that sometimes the most important things in life are not what we plan, but what we live and experience with our loved ones.